Blue Lock has a massive cast of captivating, larger-than-life characters with storylines that have been running from the beginning of the manga up to the present-day story. But I'm not exaggerating when I say there's one player who single-handedly kickstarted this entire journey. I'm talking about Meguru Bachira, protagonist Yoichi Isagi's first friend in the Blue Lock program. Bachira isn't just an invaluable dribbler and an energetic presence. He helped inspire Isagi to become the superstar player that he is today. And at the same time, Bachira's growth also offers a unique perspective on Blue Lock's philosophy of egoism. All of this more than warrants a deep dive into the character of Meguru Bachira, into his personal character arc, as well as his significance to Blue Lock's overall narrative. Hello, my name is Sean, and today I want to discuss why Bachira is way more important to Blue Lock than you ever thought. To understand why Bachira matters, I've got to start at the very beginning, at Blue Lock's first selection. This story arc is really about two things: drawing out the latent egos of the Blue Lock candidates and rebuilding their ideas about football from the ground up. These teachings have been concocted by Blue Lock's mastermind, Jinpachi Ego, but at the same time, they are also personified through the character of Bachira. When Bachira first appears, he's seen sleeping on the floor, and he's even still lying there while Ego explains the first test. The Blue Lock candidates will play tag with a football, and the person who is it when the time runs out has to leave the facility. So in that situation, the sleeping player seems like the obvious target. But right when Igaguri is about to shoot at him, Bachira jumps up and strikes back. At this point of the story, Bachira perfectly embodies the way Blue Lock is bringing about the birth of egoist strikers. He's lying asleep, just like all the egos that had been sealed away by Japan's conventional football culture. And then he jumps up. Igaguri has made the first egoistic decision of the story, and so Bachira, the spirit of egoism, rises from his slumber. But the moment where Bachira truly comes into his own is when Isagi makes an astonishing decision. Isagi has become it, and then Igaguri stumbled. So all Isagi had to do really was shoot at his helpless opponent. But right then, our protagonist changes his mind. After all, he didn't come to knock down weaker players, but to surpass his own limits and become the best striker in the world. And when Isagi decides to look for a stronger player to target instead, it's Bachira who responds to Isagi's ego. And with their teamwork, they manage to take down Ryosuke Kira, the highest ranking player in the room. So in other words, Isagi followed his ego, and in response, Bachira led him to greater heights. At the same time, this scene is also about Isagi choosing a true friend over a false one. In the first chapter, Isagi seemed to have befriended Kira, and this continued into their first trial. But Kira is the one character who outright rejects the very premise of Blue Lock. In his own words, he's only here to prove Jinpachi Ego wrong. Bachira, on the other hand, gets downright excited by Isagi's display of egoism. So when Isagi trusts Bachira and eliminates Kira, he effectively forsakes a friend who would hold him back in favor of one who pushes him to become his very best self. But let me return to the idea that Bachira is the embodiment of what the Blue Lock program is trying to achieve. There's a fundamental reason why Bachira, of all characters, is the trailblazer among the Blue Lock candidates. According to Bachira, there's a monster living inside of him, one that comes out when he's playing football and directs his every move. From a young age, Bachira didn't find fulfillment in the football he played with his friends and teammates, each of whom fell short of Bachira's expectations. You could say that Bachira fell victim to the insipid, conformist football culture that Blue Lock is trying to reform at a younger age than anyone in the series. So instead, he found joy in playing football alone with his monster, his imaginary friend. One of the most striking visual aspects of the Blue Lock manga is the auras that surround football players when they are performing at the peak of their abilities. They're not a bright radiance like in other shonen manga. Instead, Blue Lock characters are engulfed in this black miasma when they're consumed by their ego. It's as if they're being corrupted by darkness itself. And in that light, it's really remarkable how Bachira's monster is depicted. The monster is made up of wisps of blackness, with a striking resemblance to the auras of egoism throughout the series. With this, the manga communicates that Bachira's monster is basically the natural extension of the force of egoism that takes hold of its top players. In other words, Bachira had heeded the call of the abyss and rejected the ideals of Japanese football long before anyone else in Blue Lock. And so, it's no wonder that he embodies the very egoism that Jinpachi Ego is trying to set free. In fact, Bachira doesn't see a malevolent aura surrounding Isagi when Isagi chooses to target the strongest player. Instead, he sees Isagi awakening a monster of his own. This is basically the cornerstone of the relationship between Bachira and Isagi. Bachira is the trailblazer, the one who encourages Isagi to unleash his latent ego. And Isagi in turn lifted Bachira out of the loneliness that had threatened to consume this eccentric genius. I'll get back to this second point in a bit, but let me hammer home just how prominent this aspect of Bachira is throughout the series. Bachira is always one step ahead, and thereby offers a guiding light to Isagi and the other Blue Lock players. It's a general trend throughout the series that Bachira is the first member of his team to make a play. He also clears the first stage of the second selection right before Isagi, and then he's the first one of his original team to reach stage 4 of the rivalry battle. And later, he's the first Blue Lock player to come into his own in the Neo-Egoist League, right when Isagi is struggling to find his place within his new team. And more than that, Bachira is the spark of hope when everyone else succumbs to despair. When Baro obliterates Team Z, Bachira alone believes that he and Isagi might be able to score a goal. And when Team Z's efforts are trivialized by Nagi's sheer talents, Bachira gets ready to make a spectacular comeback. And more than that, he even gets excited by the prospect. In both cases, it's through his valiant efforts that Team Z comes together and manages to move forward. This is actually a second important lesson that Bachira teaches Isagi: that football is really fun. Since his early childhood, Bachira had loved to play football more than anything else. Isagi witnesses firsthand how much fun his friend has with the game, even in the most adverse of circumstances. Seeing Bachira inspires him to surpass his own limits, and as Isagi flourishes in his new environment, he too starts experiencing more joy through the sport than he'd ever imagined. Long story short, Bachira is one of the most important reasons why Isagi keeps reaching greater heights. But here's the thing, for a long time, the opposite was not the case. What Bachira got from Isagi was not growth, but affirmation. And this is why tensions start to arise as the two friends progress through the Blue Lock selections. For Bachira, the cracks first appear towards the end of the first selection. When the final match approaches for Team Z, Bachira's concern is not that he might be eliminated from Blue Lock. Rather, he's afraid that he wouldn't be able to play football with Isagi anymore. What's striking about this moment is that it takes place right before the match against Nagi and Reo, the series' most notoriously codependent duo. And I've got a whole video on them if you want my thoughts on that situation. In any case, it's as if the manga is asking us to compare the relationship between Isagi and Bachira to that of their rivals. This stage already, the manga openly displays the shortcomings of Nagi and Reo as true egoist strikers. Reo might have dragged Nagi onto the field, but he fails to inspire the prodigy to do more than just the bare minimum. Instead, it's through Isagi that Nagi starts developing an interest in football. In contrast to the friendship that failed to bring forth the best in Nagi, the match's winning goal was brought about through the friendship between Isagi and Bachira. When Isagi figures out how to score a goal, he relies on Bachira to understand his intentions. And Bachira didn't disappoint when push came to shove. But then, in the second selection, the manga sustains the comparison between the Isagi-Bachira and the Nagi-Reo duo. And this parallel gets increasingly unflattering as the story progresses. In contrast to the team-based first selection, the second selection is all about proving one's individual strength. And so, the friendship that saw Isagi and Bachira survive up to this point starts to fail them. As soon as the two of them are reunited, Isagi and Bachira automatically pair up. Not because they think that this will let their egos soar to even greater heights, but because it's comfortable. And what makes this also poignant is that their decision is contrasted to that of Nagi, who dares to step outside of his comfort zone and leave his trusted partner behind. At this point, the only one to make a truly egoistic decision is the person who originally didn't harbor any ambitions whatsoever. It's almost as if the roles have been reversed. Where Nagi leaves Reo behind to become more like Isagi, Isagi and Bachira are at risk of transforming into a duo like Nagi and Reo. And as Isagi and Bachira soon find out, their friendship won't carry them through the second selection. What's striking about their first match here is how much the manga plays up the contrast between the highly coordinated plays of Isagi, Bachira, and Nagi versus Rin and his teammates, who have no teamwork to speak of. And yet, our protagonists get utterly decimated by Blue Lock's top players. In what seems like an instance of poetic justice, the match ends with the most horrific outcome. The two original friends are torn apart. In the aftermath of this match, the manga basically spells out the implicit comparison that had been running so far between the two duos. Isagi struggles to come to terms with his loss. He lashes out at Nagi when Nagi compares him to Reo. But as Nagi rightly retorts, Isagi is equally helpless without Bachira. Right now, Isagi is at a major crossroads in his football career. Can he establish himself as an independent presence within Blue Lock, or will he fall into the same trap as Reo has after being rejected by Nagi? Isagi makes his decision. He will wean himself off of Bachira and prove that he can fight on his own as well. And with that, he secured the mentality necessary to survive the second selection. But for Bachira, meanwhile, this part of the story represents a complete reversal of fortune. The Bachira at the start of the series was the trailblazer, the one who brought out his teammates' repressed egoism. But by the end of the second selection, he's at risk of being left behind in the dust. During the rematch between Isagi's and Rin's teams, Bachira witnesses Isagi's growth firsthand. And Bachira is positively excited. At last, he's able to play the football he's wanted to all this time with other monsters. But as it turns out, Isagi and Rin don't have eyes for Bachira anymore. They're only concerned with outmaneuvering each other. And here's the kicker. Nagi too has noticed that Bachira has lost his light along the way. And he frankly declares that he'd never pick this Bachira over Rin. With this, the manga communicates that Bachira has effectively become the new Reo. After all, Nagi's arc over the course of the second selection is all about choosing his own path and leaving behind the people who would hold him back. There's a crucial scene at the end of the match against Reo, Kunigami, and Chigiri. Reo is sulking about not being chosen for the second time, but Nagi berates him for his expectations. And then Isagi chimes in. According to him, Reo's problem is that he wants to be chosen by others rather than winning and choosing himself. Someone with that mentality will never become the world's greatest striker. So then the next match comes around, and this time it's Bachira who's expecting to be chosen, and Nagi promptly makes him swallow a bitter dose of reality. So with all this out of the way, it's finally time to address the source of Bachira's ego, or lack thereof. The rematch against Rin starts with a flashback to Bachira's childhood, which really puts everything about this character into perspective. Bachira has been completely infatuated with football since his early childhood. And unfortunately, this obsessive nature alienated him from his peers, who considered him strange, even downright creepy. Fortunately, Bachira has an amazing mother who supports her son. Yes, Bachira might be different from other children, but in her view, it's wonderful to be so passionate about something. According to his mother, Bachira has something very special inside of him. Something that most people lose touch with once they grow older. That's what compels him to play football, the voice of a monster. I've already talked about how Bachira's monster is a manifestation of the kind of egoism that the Blue Lock program is trying to cultivate. But in this flashback, it turns out that the ideas explored through Bachira's character are even more fundamentally connected to the series' entire philosophy. In Jinpachi Eigo's worldview, Japanese culture is all about conforming to the expectations of society. Japanese people believe in fulfilling their societal role and dedicating themselves to the welfare of the collective at the expense of their individual ambitions. And that extends to the way they play football as well. This is exactly the process that Bachira's mom describes. For most people, growing up is about accepting one's role in society, and thereby learning to ignore the call of the monster. But what set Bachira apart from his peers is that he alone never outgrew it. This finally explains why he usually seems to be a step ahead of everyone else. To rephrase the purpose of the Blue Lock program in Bachira's terms, Blue Lock is about bringing people who had forgotten how to listen back in touch with their inner monster. But while all this made Bachira into an exceptional football player, his childhood also highlights the psychological toll this mentality took on him. Bachira is a boy who never grew up, and so he couldn't conform to the expectations of others. And what this meant is that he ended up all alone, isolated from his peers. And before he knew it, his monster had transformed into something beyond recognition. It no longer embodied his passions and beliefs, but became the manifestation of his inner demons. All this finally explains his lapse in the second selection. When Bachira entered the Blue Lock program, his arc took the complete opposite trajectory of everyone else's. While all of his rivals learned to leave behind the norms of society and embrace their inner monster, Bachira found a place where he fit in and started to embrace conformity. But now, in the match against Isagi, Bachira is confronted with the reality that he will be left behind. And so, he decides to say goodbye to his monster, so that he can move forward. This might seem like a paradoxical decision. After all, the players who succeed in Blue Lock are those with monsters of their own. So Bachira has really reached an impasse of sorts. By this point, his reliance on the monster is holding him back. But if he'd outgrow his monster, he's at risk of blowing up his football prospects altogether. So when Bachira experiences an awakening, he does the exact opposite of growing up. He rekindles his connection to his younger self, from back when playing football was a source of unadulterated joy. Bachira's character has always been about enjoying football, but over the course of the second selection, he had lost that from his sights. But now, with his awakening, he definitively proves his worth and sets himself free from the curse that had been haunting him all these years. From this point onwards, Bachira starts to renegotiate his relationship with the monster. After all, his true monster is not the creature that kept him shackled all these years. It's his childlike passion that made him play with the ball from dusk to dawn. So in the U20 match, we see how Bachira and his monster are starting to meld into one. Notably, this happens exactly because Bachira follows his impulses to enjoy the match to the fullest. With this, the monster and his ego have finally become one, and that's what pushes Bachira to surpass his limits rather than holding him back. The next step of Bachira's character journey comes during his training with the Barcelona team. I feel like this is an underappreciated moment, but it's actually really touching if you examine it in light of Bachira's entire character arc. For most of his life, Bachira has been an outcast, someone who's ridiculed and not allowed to play the way he wants. This only ended in the finale of his match against Isagi, because Isagi was the first person to truly understand Bachira's plays and barge into his best friend's lonely world. But now, in the Neo-Egoist League, Bachira has finally found a team where he actually fits in. Barcelona specializes in dribbling and technique, but more important still, its philosophy is all about harnessing the power of imagination. What Barcelona offers Bachira is not just a team with flashy movements. More fundamentally, it's a place where the things for which Bachira had been mocked in the past are put on a pedestal. The way his coach sees it, Bachira's monster is not something weird, something disgusting, but a powerful image that will take him to the next level. And at the same time, Bachira's dribbling has also matured in his new environment. Where he used to attack like a child, the new Bachira has started to bait his opponent into making a wrong move. So Bachira has grown up over the course of the story, and yet he did so without leaving his monster behind. So with all this, I feel that Bachira's in a better place than he's ever been before, and I'm looking forward to seeing how he develops further. And I've no doubt that wherever the Blue Lock players go next, Bachira will be the one leading the way. So what are your favorite Bachira moments, and where do you think his character is going from here? And if you liked what you saw, consider subscribing for more in-depth Blue Lock analysis every other week. And if you want my thoughts on other series, keep an eye out on my second channel, link in the description below.